Many scientists estimate that the unconscious mind controls more than 95% of your life. And when I say your life, I really mean that. I mean your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, your emotional responses, your dreams. All these things are essentially overseen by your unconscious mind. Now, Carl Jung, who I talked about a little bit in the last video, he knew all about this well before neuroscience was even a field of study, all right? And he believed that the unconscious mind is made up of multiple subparts. Like there were various aspects of the unconscious mind. And one of the most common ones, maybe you've heard of it, is called the shadow. Now, we all have the shadow within us. That is one part of who we are. And yet, few of us actually understand what the shadow is. So in today's video, I'll be discussing what it is. I'll talk about how it manifests in your everyday life and what you can do to integrate those shadow aspects of yourself into your total self, all right? So let's begin. I used to think the shadow self within me was my darker tendencies. And on the surface, that's kind of true, but it's a lot deeper than that. You see, the shadow is everything about yourself that you refuse to consciously identify with. For many people, those things they choose not to consciously identify with are essentially traits or certain attributes that are either bad in their mind or traits and attributes that can be used for good or bad within their own life. So I've written down some examples here. So some examples of the traditionally socially viewed as bad attributes would be things like laziness, narcissism, manipulation, and cowardice, all right? But some traits that can be used for positivity or negativity within your life, all depending on how you integrate them within your life, would be things like confidence, ambition, assertiveness, or creativity. You see, these attributes here, they manifest differently in different people, all depending on how their life is set up and what they're trying to do and how they consciously identify with those attributes themselves. And this is where it gets tricky because everybody's personality is different. The way everybody portrays themselves to the world is very different. So given this, it means that at the subconscious or unconscious level, the shadow manifests very differently from person to person, even if it is made up of essentially the same sort of traits. Because after all, aspects of your shadow have been ignored or repressed or disowned by you at the unconscious level. You have essentially rejected these aspects and pushed them away. You've cast them aside because you feel that if you consciously embody them within your life, then there'll be some sort of social repercussions of some sorts. Now, the issue is that those attributes you push aside or repress or ignore, they don't totally disappear. They actually manifest unconsciously within your life. So you'll see them in your emotions, in your thoughts, in your beliefs, in your reactionary behaviors to whatever's happening around you. And these things happen spontaneously without you consciously thinking about them. Because your shadow, as I said, it's made up of those aspects that you've rejected within yourself. So for example, let's say there's a shy person who has been repressing their aggression. Maybe they've been doing this for years. So one day they're driving to their place of work or they're driving to visit family or wherever. And they're driving along the road, but somebody suddenly cuts them off in traffic. They got to slam on their brakes and their heart rate goes up. They start yelling and swearing and hitting the steering wheel and they're saying F you and all these nasty things to the driver in front of them. That's an unconscious emotional response by the shadow because for years that person has been repressing their anger. Rather than taking a deep breath and going about their drive in a calm manner, they're freaking out. They're just completely losing their shit. They haven't become aware of the aggression and anger deep within their unconscious mind. Because of this, the shadow manifests. The shadow makes itself known, and it does so in the most unexpected ways. Now, Carl Jung once said, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. What he means by this is that the less you understand these unconscious parts of yourself, the stronger and more sudden they'll manifest within your everyday life. And it happens in these destructive ways that ultimately don't help your life at all. The person who admits they have a lot of anger and aggression within them is a lot more stable than the person who says, oh no, I'm not an angry guy, I have no aggression at all. Because that second guy, he's completely lying. We all have anger, we all have aggression somewhere deep down within us. If you go about your life thinking that, no, I have no negative traits, I have no anger, no aggression, none of that at all, then there will be a point in time in your life where that manifests, perhaps in ways that hurt you or hurt people all around you. Now, don't get me wrong, I know this sounds insane. If you're first hearing about the shadow self right now, then I get it. You're probably thinking, there's no way, man. How could that be the case? But just going off that neuroscience fact that I started the video with, how can you deny it? If the subconscious or unconscious mind controls more than 95% of your life, then suffice to say, there's parts of you that you haven't quite understood. And those parts of you will control your life in ways that you don't quite understand, especially if you don't put in the time, effort, and energy to understanding what those unconscious parts of you really are. And these aspects of ourselves that we don't consciously want to identify with, we project them onto other people. This happens unconsciously, of course, but we see all these negative aspects in other people and they're highlighted. It seems so obvious. And that's why there's some people you just don't like. Now, I'm not saying this is always the case with people you don't like. You know, there could be people you go to school with or people you work with or people in your neighborhood who are just complete assholes, all right? It happens. But in many cases, the things we dislike about other people are aspects of ourselves we haven't fully come to terms with. And these rejected parts of us are essentially highlighted in other people. Now, for example, I used to be a very shy and anxious person. And I'd see others who are confident or charismatic, and I'd immediately associate that person with being a jerk. But the reality is that I was just rejecting that part of myself that could be outgoing and could be confident and could be charismatic and projecting it onto other people. And through years of doing inner work like self-hypnosis and active imagination and meditation and journaling, I realized that I had this unconscious belief. This unconscious belief was essentially making it very difficult for me to become confident and charismatic and outgoing for many years. And that belief was that if I became somebody who was outgoing and confident and charismatic and could speak to people with total conviction in everything I was doing and saying, then I would use this for negative ways, in ways that were manipulative for personal gain. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that. But once I did, I realized that, it's a foolish belief. I can use these things, these skills I have to speak and communicate with other people in ways that are beneficial, in ways that lift others up and actually enrich their lives in whatever way that may be. This is especially a big problem in modern times with many men. You see, positive aggression and masculinity are often poorly integrated within our lives, and there are many reasons why this is. Many of the issues that especially men are facing with masculinity and being assertive rather than aggressive, it comes through in certain behaviors like passive aggressiveness, like conflict avoidance and approval-seeking behaviors that ultimately put a man in an even worse off position. And on the surface, it seems like a guy who's kind of meek and lets things go and isn't really aggressive is virtuous, or that they're a nice guy, or yeah, they're just so cool, such a great person. But I would disagree. I believe that if you don't come to terms with the darker aspects of yourself, then you can't be a complete and total person. So when you're in a situation where you need to be assertive or you need to be aggressive and you need to really express what's on your mind, and for whatever reason, if you can't do that because you haven't embodied those subconscious aspects of your shadow, then you're going to get walked over and people will take advantage of you. And ultimately, years down the line, your life will not go how you want it to go. And so the shadow grows even darker and you begin to feel more envy, anger, and even resentment for people who have these certain attributes that you have not integrated within yourself. And at this point, you become so possessed by these unconscious forces, and by forces I mean those limiting beliefs, those self-deprecating thoughts, those unconscious emotional responses to certain things happening around you. You become so possessed by these things that they essentially dominate your entire personality. And from there, it just gets like the snowball just gets even bigger as it continues to roll down the hill. And the ironic thing is that this isn't just a thing that's happening to individuals, but when you have many individuals within a society, there's essentially this mass collective unconscious shadow that controls people at the cultural and societal level. And this is obviously, if you just look around, it's a very common thing happening in 2026 and beyond. So the question is, how can you become aware of these things within your shadow? How can you integrate these aspects within yourself? Now, there are many ways you can go about this, but I've simplified it. I've condensed it in the most straightforward way, all right? So the first thing is radical self-observation. Now, I know that might seem overly simple, like, yeah, just pay attention to yourself, but nah, it's much more detailed than that. So you want to watch everything you think, everything you say, everything you do to the point where it's a bit ridiculous. It's a bit robotic. You do that for a few weeks, a few months, and you will eventually begin to understand essentially how you operate within the world. Once you have that awareness, then you can develop an understanding. When you have the understanding, then you can dig even deeper into the subconscious mind or the unconscious mind, which brings me to number 2, that is free journaling. So every day you want to pick up some sort of a notebook. I have one here, and crack that thing open, set yourself a 10-minute timer, 15-minute timer, and just write. Don't write with a prompt. Don't try to answer any questions. Just simply write. Fill up the whole page, fill up 2 pages, 3 pages, whatever you can within that time block. And what this will do is it'll just spill out all the unconscious material that's just waiting to bubble up to the surface of your mind. Now, Sigmund Freud, he was the mentor of Carl Jung. And one of the modes of therapy that he did with his patients was called psychoanalysis. Or excuse me, he did that, but it was a free association. That's what I meant to say. Free association was when patients would come in, they lay down on the couch, close their eyes, and just speak. I'm sure you've seen this classic trope in different movies or TV shows before. Free journaling is like the same thing as free association. You're just letting the unconscious mind just spill out. And once the timer goes off, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, you want to go back, you want to take a break, step away, come back to it, and read everything you wrote down. Maybe it doesn't make any sense, and that's okay. Maybe that's a sign that, hey, your mind is a storm, your mind is chaotic. You gotta dial things in a bit. And that's totally okay. So you can do that with meditation and mindfulness and all these other things that I've talked about plenty in all these other videos, all right? So that brings me to number 3, the third point, the third way you can better understand your shadow and integrate it into your everyday life, and that is stop performing. So we tend to wear some sort of a mask. This mask is something that we wear when we're at work, when we are in school, when we are with family, and even with friends, all right? Jung called this the persona. That is the face we put on, that mask when we're in public. It's the image we want other people to see. But I will say stop performing to the point where you lose your sense of self, all right? You can be socially appropriate, but still show your attributes and your beliefs and your thoughts and your authentic personality to the world. It's very possible. The performative nature of socialization, especially in modern times, is just getting so ridiculous at this point, especially with social media. I'd say being performative is even more amplified because we're more globally connected to people than ever before. You can see people from China and Australia and the UK and Germany and Brazil and all these other places across the world without ever meeting them. And we post content, we put pictures out there, we put out videos, and we want to put forward this facade. Like, yeah, I'm tougher than I should be, or yeah, I'm smart, I'm this, I'm that. But the reality is, like, if you live your life performing for other people, you lose your soul along the way. And eventually you just forget who you really are. So that's the third point. I understand we all want to fit in and feel secure and feel safe and keep going about our ways without stirring the psychological pot within our own minds, but trust me when I say investigating and becoming aware of and understanding your shadow self is one of the most impactful things that you'll ever do. Not only will it help you, but it'll help everybody around you, because when you become your most evolved self, when you become actualized, if you want to say that, then people around you notice. And maybe it'll inspire them. Maybe it'll get them acting in accordance with who they really are. And then if that person does it, and that person does it, and that person does it, and then they all influence 100 other people, then, well, the world is an even better place to live in. So, yeah, I'm ranting here at this point. I hope this made sense. If you're still watching, I appreciate you, and yeah, speak to you soon.